It finally happened. The Yankees have decided to enter the 21st century. Starting in 2025, their players will officially be allowed to grow beards. You'd think they just legalized fireworks in New York City with how quickly social media ran with it. Photoshopped beards on Yankee players were everywhere within the hour. Honestly, congrats to them for finally catching up with UPS in the dress code department. But is this really about modernization, or did Devin Williams' trade push them to reconsider? Speaking of reconsidering, Andres Munoz, he's got a changeup that's entered the chat. And if it's as nasty as it's looked in early work, we might be talking about a new weapon that changes his entire profile on the mound. We've also got Lazaro Montes launching baseballs, Rowdy Tellez fighting for a roster spot, and Jesse Hahn making a case for one last ride in the bigs. We got team chemistry, second base battles, and everything in between. Let's get into it. This is Keep It Electric, episode 75, starting right now. All right, so before I jump into this next topic, I'm going to quickly announce that this episode number 75, is available in video on YouTube. I wasn't expecting for this episode to be a landmark episode, so to speak, but I just decided to just wing it and just do it. So same show, same everything. If you want to watch, head over to YouTube, watch and listen there. I believe my page is called Keep It Electric. I don't really know why it wouldn't be, but go there if you want to watch my face. All right, so Logan Gilbert has a well-earned reputation as a tinkerer. He's a pitcher who's never content to stick with the status quo, unlike some hurlers who simply hone in their existing arsenal. Gilbert is constantly experimenting with new grips, new pitches, always trying to enhance his game. You look at every spring training, it seems he starts with something new up his sleeve. If you look back at 2022, he worked on a more firm, harder slider. A little inspiration came from Jacob deGrom. He worked on that to give hitters a different look. By 2023, he unveiled a splitter that quickly became an effective weapon in his arsenal. Gilbert's always seeking that next edge. He loves to tinker, he loves to improve, and that sets the stage for this new sinker idea. I find this idea super intriguing. So before we talk about that new pitch, let's look at Gilbert's pitching arsenal last season. So in 2024, he essentially featured a 5-pitch mix. 2 pitches mainly dominated, his slider and his four-seam fastball. He threw a slider about 32% of the time and his four-seamer about 31% of the time. By far, his most used offerings between those 2 pitches. Those 2 power pitches, high-octane, 90s, heater, nasty breaking ball, those were his bread and butter. Behind them, he had the splitter, split change around 13%. He had the curveball at 12%, the cutter at 10%. And then he threw a sinker, but he threw that sinker 1.4% of the time. He threw only 44 sinkers last year. That 1.4%, those are pitches that were classified as sinkers last year, but we're not really sure if they really were sinkers. So, in other words, a 2-seam sinking fastball was pretty much non-existent in Logan Gilbert's pitch mix. Still, in 2024, he had a fantastic season. He logged 208 innings with 3.23 ERA and a 27% strikeout rate. Heavy reliance on that four-seamer and that slider. Both of those clearly worked well. And you call it heavy reliance, or I call it heavy reliance, but still, the way he mixes pitches, very lightly used for most pitchers. He mixes up his pitches pretty well. So I still like the possibility of a new pitch for Gilbert, a pitch that moves differently. It's really compelling to think about. Given that Gilbert hardly used a sinker in 2024, why are we talking about one now? Because if Gilbert has indeed been tinkering again this offseason, a refined sinker could be the new toy that adds another dimension to his game. A sinker, typically has arm side run, downward movement. We know that. Contrasts with the straight ride of his four seam. His four seamer is great up in the zone. That's where he likes to use it. But introducing a sinker, a running pitch, would keep hitters off balance. Would be attacking a different part of the zone. Last year, he complemented with a cutter early on. He eventually did away with that. I think he shelved it. I didn't see him use it that much at the end of last year. But a sinker, especially like a hybrid splitter sinker, if you know what I mean, I think that might stick. I think it would serve a better purpose in his arsenal. It would be inducing ground balls. It'd be giving batters a different look, especially for right-handed hitters. In Gilbert's case, think of a pitch he can throw in the lower half of the zone that dives late. If he can refine a sinker that also drops like a splitter, it would be a nightmare for hitters expecting the high heat or the slider away. We've seen other pitchers add a sinker to some pretty good effect. I think we've seen Bryce Miller use it a little bit. We saw George Kirby start mixing one in from time to time. For Gilbert, who already commands the top of the zone, the glove side with his slider, a weapon that moves arm side and down could round his arsenal pretty well. So in short, a better sinker could mean more ground outs, quicker at bats. A better sinker, I don't know, it'll be a good way for him to escape jams. All very good things if you're a Mariners fan. So this creates another question. He mentioned that he was working on a version of the sinker. Does this mean that he was working on a splinker? The term itself sounds playful, but I'm being serious. And if you don't know what a splinker is, it's essentially a hybrid between a splitter and a sinker. I imagine if you're watching this or listening, majority of you probably know ball, but I'm going to break down a splinker really quick for those who don't. So a pitch with the dropping action of a splitter, but thrown with the two-seam grip and intent of a sinker, is a splinker. But it's usually classified as a splitter by the tracking system since it drops, but it's thrown harder like a sinker. One of the most famous recent examples is Paul Skeens. When Skeens arrived at the Pirates camp, he made it known he wanted to use his full arsenal, including a hybrid pitch between a splitter and a sinker, which he referred to as a splinker. Skeens found immediate success with it. The Chicago Cubs saw the splinker plenty of times in his debut. They swung at it 12 times. They missed it 5 times. Skeens unleashed this pitch 21 times out of his 84 pitches. The Cubs were left befuddled in his debut. Skeens throws his splinker extremely hard, often around 95 miles an hour, I believe. I think it averaged 94. That's what makes his pitch so devastating. If you don't usually see splitter movement at a sinker velocity, you're kind of screwed. For his first several starts, he leaned on the splinker heavily. He even called it his go-to pitch in key moments, and hitters managed to hit it like .073. That was the batting average. .073 was their average against it. They whiffed it 33.7% of the time. In one showdown, Skeens used a 96-mile-an-hour splinter to induce an inning-ending double play from Paul Goldschmidt. He really illustrated the pitch's power and movement. All this to say, the concept of a splinter being put in Logan Gilbert's arsenal, that would be tremendous. That would be amazing. I can't really imagine what that would turn him into as a pitcher. Now, I'm not saying that Gilbert is Paul Skeens, but Gilbert is no slouch in the velocity department. If Gilbert can develop his own version of a splinter, even a notch less extreme than Skeens, it could be a true weapon. The intrigue here is that Gilbert already has a splitter in his arsenal, the one that he added last year, and a pretty good sinker that he's toyed with. So converging those into one pitch, a refined, hard diving sinker, might unlock the best of both. A pitch that he can throw with confidence for strikes and a chase pitch. We know Gilbert has huge hands. He's got elite extension toward the plate. Both are qualities that can make a splitter, sinker, dive even more effective. In Skeen's case, he originally wanted a sinker to attack right-handed batters inside, but by tweaking the grip for more drop, he ended up with a pitch he could also use against lefties. So Gilbert might be eyeing that same versatility. Imagine him using a 95-mile-an-hour splinter to saw off a righty for a ground ball, then dropping the same pitch under a lefty's bat. It could help neutralize opposite-handed hitters, much like a splitter was intended to do, while also giving same-handed hitters something new to fear. So I say all this to say the splinter could fill the last gap in Gilbert's pitch mix, make hitters cover all quadrants, and have them have to deal with all speeds, high, low, glove side, and arm side. So let's switch to Logan Gilbert's first Cactus League outing this year. I think that outing probably led to some speculation because it was a little sloppy. It did lead to me speculating about this hypothesis. Gilbert took the mound, was it 3 days ago, against the Brewers, and his performance was a bit of a mixed bag. And I say 3 days ago because I'm recording this on Thursday. This isn't going to be available on Friday, so sorry about that. On Friday, 4 days ago, my bad. His performance was a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, his stuff was evident. He struck out 3 batters in the first inning. He's blowing pitches past hitters, but on the other hand, he still struggled with his command. He issued a leadoff walk at the beginning of the game before he fanned 3 batters, and then another leadoff walk in the beginning of the second inning. And after that second walk, he gave up a single and was lifted from the game. So he had reached his pitch count at that point. But in total, he recorded 5 outs, 3 of them by strikeout, and allowed 2 base runners via walk. But for the most of this outing, his stuff looked pretty good. The results weren't terrible, but clearly he wasn't pinpointing his location very well, especially in early innings. Not only do we need to just consider this spring training, some rust should be expected. Often when pitchers experiment with a new grip or pitch in spring, their command can waver as they get comfortable. So Gilbert himself noted in the past and in past springs that game adrenaline can make his new pitches a little erratic. For example, when he debuted his split change last spring, he admitted the game atmosphere kind of kicked in and he was leaving the balls up. In that same outing, ironically, his usual excellent fastball, he called it the least functional pitch he was throwing. And he was struggling with his fastball while he was unveiling his new splitter. So this is pretty common when you think about it. You introduce a new element and you try to find your feel. Your bread and butter kind of no longer becomes your bread and butter. All that kind of gets put on hold for a bit. So we saw a bit of that pattern. His fastball wasn't sharp out the gate in his 2025 debut, which could have been a byproduct of him working on that sinker splitter in the early spring. Either way, those leadoff walks, those are just growing pains. The good news is that spring training is exactly the time for Gilbert to be experimenting like this. It's exactly the right time for him to have some hiccups. And Gilbert and the Mariners coaching staff, I'm sure, are going to review the outing. And if the new pitch was in play, which he says it was, he didn't throw any strikes, they'll iron out the kinks. Patience is definitely the key here. Command and consistency is going to be a price to pay when you're adding to your new arsenal. But the payoff can be worth it. And if the payoff is a splinker, I would definitely say that that's worth it. So if you're a Mariners fan, there's reason to be excited. Gilbert really is experimenting, or if he's experimenting with a splinker, it's a sign that he's still pushing to get better. And it's an encouraging thought if he really is experimenting with that. He's already so good. If he shows his serious analytical side, always looking to refine and adapt. And it brings a bit of a playful mystery to us watching. Watch the screen when it's throwing again. If you see a splinker pop up, the next time he gets a batter to flail at something, diving outside the zone, I don't know. That's something to be excited about. Best of all, if Logan Gilbert does master this version of a sinker hybrid thing that he's doing, this would make him a game changer. All right, so my Logan Gilbert rant went longer than I planned, and I wanted to talk about Munis's changeup, but I don't want this episode to be all about the arms. We might need to save the Munis talk for the next show. Let's talk about the hype train that I'm on and still on, and that's Lazaro Montes. Because if you didn't know his name before, you should now. This kid launched a baseball early in spring training. I'm talking about a no doubt, see you later, absolute tank, out to dead center field, 3-run bomb that left everyone asking, who is this guy? Well, I'm going to remind you who he is, because I talked about this guy before. I called him the wild card in the Mariners system, and he's trying to play that card. Now, I'm not saying one home run is rewriting the Mariners depth chart, but I am saying this. If Montes keeps swinging like this, things could get interesting. So let's talk about it. Montes, he's only 20 years old. He's one of Seattle's top prospects. He's been tearing up the minors with video game numbers. If you want to know more of my feelings, just go listen to episode 73 where I just go in about this. But now he's showing that pop against big league arms, and I think that's what matters. Now, I know spring training is the land of overreactions. We've seen this before. We've seen a young guy come up and have a hot stretch, and suddenly fans are drawing up opening day lineups. I promise you that's not what I'm doing here. Well, not yet, but admit it. Like, it's kind of fun to think about. Now, let's revisit the big question I threw out in episode 73. If Montes dominates in spring training, could the Mariners be forced to reconsider their development plan? Let's be real, probably not. Not yet, at least. One homer doesn't flip the script, but the Mariners are patient with their prospects, and Montes is likely ticketed for AA or AAA to start this year. But the thing that I think about is, like, what if this is just the beginning? What if Montes keeps making loud contact? What if he starts forcing the issue? We've seen it happen before. Julio Rodriguez mashed his way into the majors ahead of schedule. Could Montes do the same? Now, again, I want to be clear. Montes is not Julio. Julio had speed, elite defense, a more polished all-around game. Montes is more of a pure power bat. He's not swiping 20 bags. He's not making highlight reel plays in center field. But the bat is real. And in that game, in today's game, power moves the needle. So if Montes keeps hitting, the Mariners might have to make a decision. Do they stick to the plan and keep him in the minors, or push him forward if he proves that he's ready? I'm not saying he's making the opening day roster. I will calm down on that. But what about the midseason call-up? What if Seattle needs a power bat this summer? If Montes is raking in the minors, do they pull the trigger? That's the fun part about this conversation. Like, he's putting himself into the mix. Here's what this home run really means. It's a statement from Montes that he belongs in the big league camp. It's a moment that gets fans and Mariners front office paying attention. And it's a preview of what could be coming in the near future. One swing doesn't change everything, but it does give us something to dream on. And if Montes keeps this up, the Mariners might not be able to keep him in the minors for very long. So I suggest everyone to buckle up, because I got a feeling this won't be the last time we're talking about Lazaro Montes going deep. And I'm here for it. All right, so I know I'm talking about a long shot with Lazaro Montes, and some people probably aren't really going to be coming along with me on that. So I might as well just add more fuel to the fire here. I'm going to talk about Jesse Hahn for a minute. Oh, am I saying Hahn is going to break camp with the Mariners? No. Is it a long shot? It's absolutely a long shot, but I'm about to sit here and make a compelling case for it anyway. And you better believe it. Like, before you say anything, I'll have to admit I've got a little East Coast bias on this one. I watched Hahn early in his career, and there's a part of me that just wants to see him put it all together one more time. So let's dive in. Can Jesse Hahn really make the Mariners bullpen? And why am I betting on him despite all logic? So let's start with the obvious. The Mariners don't have a ton of bullpen spots up for grabs. This isn't a team desperately trying to fill innings. They already have Munoz, Brash, Spire, and others locking down key roles. So even assuming Seattle carries 8 relievers, we're talking about 1, maybe 2 openings max. And that's really if everything goes smoothly. Hahn is battling against younger, fresher arms, guys who might have more long-term upside or simply just be more known like quantities at this stage. So yes, it's an uphill climb, but if we're looking at spring training as a true competition, I think Hahn has a shot to at least make things interesting. Now, if you followed baseball in the mid 2010s, you probably remember Jesse Hahn as one of those sleeper arms. One of those arms that everyone thought could be a mid-rotation guy or a nasty bullpen weapon. He showed early promise. I think he was drafted by the Rays, debuted with the Padres in 2014. Looked very legit right away. Posted a 3.07 ERA in 12 starts. Then he spent some time in Oakland. Oakland scooped him up. He flashed promise. Injuries kept kind of creeping in and really throwing his career off. Then he went to the Royals. He reinvented himself as a reliever in Kansas City. In 2020, he was absolutely filthy. Posted a .52 ERA over 18 appearances. Like, absolutely ridiculous. He looked like a legitimate late inning guy, potential closer. And then the injury bug bit him again. Tommy John setbacks, years away from the big leagues. And just like that, Jesse Hahn became more of a baseball trivia answer than a presence on an MLB roster. Now, here's where things get fun for me, because Jesse Hahn is back, and he's back in Seattle. The Mariners took a flyer on him, and honestly, I love it. There's no real downside here. If he flames out, it's a spring training experiment. But if he finds even a fraction of his former dominance, Seattle might have unearthed a hidden weapon. Now, what made Hahn effective when he was good? Velocity and movement. Even post-surgery, his fastball still had some life. He's not an overpowering guy, but he lived in the mid-90s, could touch upper 90s, got a sharp curveball, always his bread and butter there. In 2014 and 2015, he had a 40% whiff rate and that curveball was a true strikeout pitch. So on top of that, he's got the experience factor. Unlike some of the younger competition, Hahn has been there before, and he knows how to navigate tough spots. And for relatively young team like the Mariners, they could really use a bit of that right now. Now, let's look at the real question here. Is this just a feel-good story coming from me? Or does he actually look like a guy who can contribute? And I think that's where things get interesting. So far, Hahn's been healthy in the spring training. His velocity is still trending upward, sitting right in the mid-90s. It's a huge sign that his arm strength is coming back. The command, still a work in progress. He's shown flashes of that nasty curve, but also it's only had his moments. He's shown a few moments of clear rust. Spring training numbers can be deceiving, but if he's getting swings and misses, that's something to keep an eye on. The Mariners don't need perfection out of him. They just need to see if there's a usable version of Jesse Hahn in 2024. And so far, I think he's had 2 outings so far in spring training. 4 out of his 6 outs were Ks. He's showing that he can still go. Now, the road to opening day for Hahn definitely is not a straight line. He needs a few things to break his way. He needs to stay healthy. The Mariners won't take a risk on a guy that they think could break down in the midseason. He needs to show effectiveness. He needs to show effectiveness in short bursts, if he's touching 95, 96 and getting some swing and misses with that curveball, I think he's got a case. If he can also outperform all these fringe relievers that the Mariners are bringing in, I think he can make another case for himself. Spring is all about making an impression, and if Hahn's stuff looks sharper than the other competitors, why couldn't he force his way into the conversation? So, again, I know I'm hitting you with another unrealistic take. I think that seems to be what I'm going after today, but there's a very real chance Hahn could make the roster, and there's a very real chance that Hahn may not have it anymore. But if there's even a 10% chance that he finds the magic again, I'm rooting for it. We've seen resurgent relievers pop out of nowhere, whether it's a guy like Drew Pomerantz reinventing himself or Tyler Matzik going from the obscurity that he reached and then back to the Braves as like their postseason hero. The bullpen is kind of a wild place for them. Jesse Hahn could be one of those guys. If things break right, I think this could be a good case for him. So I'm not saying that Jesse Hahn is a lock for the Mariners. Not at all. But am I willing to bet on him as a sleeper pick to surprise people? Absolutely. Baseball's full of comeback stories. Maybe Jesse Hahn can be another one of those. All right, so I find myself talking about this topic way more than I prefer to. I cover a lot of the noise at second base for Soto Mojo a lot. So I'm going to touch on the topic at second base again while I wrap up this show. And I might be taking a break from talking about second base after this week, to be honest. Let's just be real about it. Like, I love what Dylan Moore brings to this team. But in this situation, if I haven't made it clear, I am rooting for Ryan Bliss in this situation. Now, don't get me wrong. Demo is that Swiss Army knife. He can play anywhere. He's got a gold glove to show for it. He can play shortstop. He can play outfield. He can play second base. He can play first base. He can play wherever you need him. And we've seen him go on hot streaks at the plate too, like the stretch that he had last season where he hit close to 300 with some pop. So he can absolutely contribute. I'm not taking anything away from Dylan Moore in that area. But he's never been a full-time everyday starter at one spot. His real value is his versatility. If you make him the everyday second baseman, you lose that flexibility that makes him so useful. It's like taking your multi-tool and only using the knife, ignoring all of the other gadgets. Plus, Moore's bat can be inconsistent. His career batting average is in the low 200s. Sure, he draws walks, steals some bases, and can pop the occasional homer. But when he's out there every day, we've seen him slump. So even though he's a safe, known option, it might not be the best way to use him. Now let's talk about Ryan Bliss. I'm excited about Ryan Bliss. He came over in the Paul Sewald trade last year, made some noise in the minors right away. In AAA Tacoma, he hit well. He swiped 50 bases. That's the kind of speed and energy he brings. He got a brief call up to Seattle, and his numbers weren't great. But that was only about 60 at-bats. It's a tiny sample. I'm not going to judge him on that. What I care about is his potential and what he showed in Tacoma. He showed that he's a spark plug who can ignite the lineup if given the chance. You can tell Bliss is hungry too. He said recently that he's just happy to have a shot to show what he can do. That's all he wants. I love that attitude. I can get behind that attitude. He's 25 and in his prime, so why not give him the opportunity? If he runs with it, the Mariners might get a dynamic young player. If not, you still have Dylan Moore to fall back on. To me, it's a low-risk, high-reward situation. Big picture, we know whoever wins this job is really just keeping the seat warm for Cole Young. Cole is one of Seattle's most exciting young players, and likely the second baseman of the future. He's only 21. He'll probably start the season in AAA, but by midseason, or if these two guys, Moore and Bliss, kill it by 2026, this guy is probably your starter in Seattle. So whoever holds down second base now is basically a placeholder for Young. That's fine. Like, it doesn't mean second base isn't important right now. We still need someone to produce until Young arrives, and there's still no promise behind Young. But for me, that means we need to give Bliss the shot. Let the kid play and see what he can do. Meanwhile, use Dylan Moore in the super utility role where he thrives, where he won a Gold Glove. Move him around, plugging holes at second, first, third. I don't care. Let him pitch. I'm sure he'll probably be good at it. That way you're maximizing Moore's value while giving Bliss a chance to grow with regular playing time. So bottom line, I am Team Bliss. Moore is best used in that utility role, and eventually Cole Young is going to take over anyway. Now, this battle's still fun to watch. It's the most intriguing battle on the Mariners roster right now. We get to sit here and watch really good second basemen battle it out and watch the front office figure it out. But at the end of the day, I'm rooting for Bliss. That's my take on the Mariners second base situation. It's unwavering. It's not going to change. And I'm going to move on from that topic. Thanks for listening to this episode of Keep It Electric. If you took the time to visit YouTube and watch this video, thank you. There's more to come. I'll see you next time. Keep it electric. Go Mariners.